Chapter 9. The Weekend of the Murders. Shanann left for her trip to Arizona, and Christopher and the girl stayed home. That Saturday evening is when Christopher told Shanann he was going to a game with the guys, but in fact, he had a date with Nikki. He hired a babysitter, and the two of them went out. Christopher had never gotten a sitter and gone out while Shanann was out of town. This is something she normally did not feel comfortable with. Christopher and Nikki went out for dinner at a bar and grill. Christopher usually used gift cards for their dates that he got from work. Oh, sneaky ass. But all of those were used. Plenty dates, huh? This time he charged the meal on their personal account. It was over $62. Saturday afternoon, one of Christopher's friends had tickets to a football game. He asked Christopher to go with him and have a guy's night out. Christopher did think about telling Nikki he could not get a babysitter and go to the game with his friend. This was chance number 2 that God gave him. As we know, he did not take that chance. He went out with Nikki instead. He, as usual, let Shanann know how much he had spent. It seems that Christopher wanted Shanann to find out, so he didn't have to tell her. To use their credit card and then tell Shanann was the closest he could get to telling her about Nikki. Immediately, when she saw the amount, she knew something was not right. That was way too much for one person's meal at a bar and grill. She knew Christopher would not have had more than 1 beer, 2 at the most. She looked up the menu online. Christopher had told her he had salmon and a beer. She shared with her girlfriends, and they agreed that was too much money for one person. The average time an affair usually lasts is 6 to 8 weeks. Christopher was well within that time frame. Had it been under normal circumstances, and he had been left alone by Nikki, even a little, he would have turned around. Guessing she probably would have forgiven and put their marriage back together had she been given the opportunity to do so. Nikki was worried that Shanann was back home, and Nikki had to dig her nails in a little deeper, and so she did. Why was killing on Christopher's mind? Is 6 weeks really worth giving up everything? Of course, that has happened that way, but usually no one is ready to give up family and the life they've built for a 6-week love affair. His family was everything he had ever wanted in his life, and he knew he loved them deeply. He could feel himself going back and forth in his head about killing them. No one knows, not even Christopher. He says, obviously a scenario not thought through. Christopher feels, he says, obviously a scenario not thought through, finally played out. They said that twice, I don't know why. Why did Christopher feel he could not leave Shanann and have a girlfriend? Perhaps in his mind, it didn't follow the rules. It didn't make sense to him, but murder made more sense. He ruined his own life and everything he ever wanted. He had threw it all away, literally. He knows that had he made a different decision, it could have changed everything. What was putting that roadblock in his head, and why could he not think normally? There was never a toxicology test or a psychological exam done on Christopher. The toxicology test wouldn't make sense because they did not arrest Christopher until a few days after the murders, but a psychological exam is usually done automatically. It would have made sense to have complete workup done on him. Otherwise, who knows what was wrong with him? Christopher was told at the time by his attorneys that if he let them do an exam, anything he said could be held against him, and that the courts would appear and the courts would hear everything he said. Since he pled guilty, that should have mattered to him, unless it had something to do with the future. But for some reason, that meant something to Christopher, and he did not want a psychological exam done. Now if he wants a psychological workup done, it would be at his expense. He has no money, therefore would have to depend upon his parents to pay for it. Blah, blah, blah. They would be willing to pay for one, but Christopher still says he does not want one. As to the reason why, he wouldn't, one could only guess. He's afraid of what he might hear. Is it worse to find out you are insane and realize you do not live in reality? or you are not insane but have the capability to murder your whole family. How does a society imprison people without knowing the difference? Ugh. It says society has no patience or responsibility to the criminally insane. They are misfits of society who can basically be put away without any thought to why they are sick. We know a normal thinking person does not think about and plan to kill his family. Yet we know there are many times this has happened. Christopher Coleman's case from 2007 is almost parallel to this story. He murdered his wife and 2 sons. He was a bodyguard for Joyce Myers. He received 4 life sentences, and weirdly, he is in the same prison as Christopher Watts. Still another case in, I don't know, Shannon, I don't know, Illinois. Christopher Vaughn murdered his wife and 3 children by shooting them in the face. Oh my God, at close range with a shotgun. Oh, Jesus. He talked later on how there was a real darkness and evil around him. Right after the murders, he had no remorse. When the police were questioning him later, he refused to even look at pictures of his family. They said there was such a darkness in him that it was scary. He would not put the names of his children with their pictures for the authorities. He would not even use his wife's or children's names. He is also spending life in prison. He needs to die. What evil lurks ready to put this into someone's mind, and why are some people susceptible to it and others are not? That other story I have to look up. That's got me like choked up. Christopher has had a hard time looking people in the eye when talking to them. So when asked him why, he says he has always been that way. His mother verified that by saying when he was a teenager, he asked her why he couldn't look people in the eyes when talking to them. She thought it was a sign of shyness. How much of it was a lack of confidence or social anxiety? Others will say when a person can't look you in the eye, it's because they are hiding something. Still today, he wants to follow all the rules at the prison and not upset anyone. I bet not. He is said to be a model prisoner. He won't ask for anything or complain about anything. Christopher says he never felt the emotion of anger until the morning of August 13th. That does not seem possible or normal. He went into a rage at the time of the murders and could not stop, but that was his first confession. In his own words today, he says that he was not in a rage that morning. He said Shanann made him angry, but when he killed her, he was not in a rage. As he explains the murders today, he wasn't in a rage until he got to the oil fields. If he had been planning the murders, then he did not suddenly go into a rage. That's how the DA put it. That he calculatedly planned the murders. Later in the book, you will read this in his own words. Is this a learned ability to kill a loved one, or is it genetics combined with the path taken as a younger person? How could the idea have even come to his mind to kill his family? All things start in the mind. However, is it insanity to have it come into your mind and entertain the thought? How is it the crime scene was so sloppy at the oil fields, especially for someone that planned the murders ahead of time? His family feels he pled guilty and was pushed through the system and put in prison as quickly as possible. The feeling that he was guilty, they say, looks like he was sentenced and just thrown away. Uncanny, because that's what he did to his family. Does society want to know what causes another human to do something like this so maybe it can watch for signs to prevent it? We don't even know if there were signs. Christopher hid it well, as do most who plan to do something like this. Yet he has a family, mother, father, sister, aunts, and uncles that is left in the wake of what has happened. Maybe it would help Shanann's family to understand what disconnected that morning and caused an otherwise normal father, husband, son to do something so horrific. The Rustics, who loved Christopher like he was their own son and trusted him to care for their sweetest and most valuable treasures, would like to know why he would do something like he did. Christopher says he would like to have some of the questions answered himself. Christopher does not show much of any emotions. I'm not sure, as I've said, that he is capable of real emotions. He is called by many a narcissist. The definition of a narcissist is a person who has an excessive interest in or admiration of themselves. There is a spectrum of narcissism, but Christopher does not fit the common narcissist. All right, Giovanni. There is a spectrum of narcissism, but Christopher does not fit the common narcissist. However, there is a narcissistic rage. Narcissistic rage is a reaction to narcissistic injury. Narcissistic injury is a perceived threat to a narcissistic self-esteem or self-worth. Narcissistic injury is a cause of distress and can lead to dysregulation of behaviors as in narcissistic rage. The injury is usually caused by one of the three things: challenged confidence, injured self-esteem, or a false sense of self. The fact that Christopher was usually so quiet may mean that he has the fortitude of both forms of expression, silence, and rage. He did think of others besides himself by the praises of so many people. He was a loving father, husband, son-in-law, and friend. Christopher cared for his little girl's daily needs. He picked them up from school, played with them, gave them baths, fed them, read them bedtime stories. This is not the usual traits of a narcissist. However, if his life was considered a threat to who he really is, it is probably built up until he blew. A simmering pot ready to explode, and explode he did. Okay, that was the whole chapter 9. We'll continue with chapter 10 in the next video. Thank y'all.